Oscar's race reveals something big about McLaren's 2026 chances. Ollie's huge crash pushes FIA to change rules, and Verstappen reveals bad news after another horrible race. What just happened at Suzuka might completely change Formula One forever, and the sport's governing body has something very important to say about it. We are just a handful of races into the 2026 Formula One season, and already the new regulations are under more scrutiny than anyone expected. The Ollie Bearman crash at Spoon Curve during the Japanese Grand Prix has ignited a conversation that some people in the paddock have been trying to have since before the season even started. And now the FIA has stepped in with an official statement that tells us a lot about where this sport is heading. Let me break down everything you need to know, because this story has layers that go way beyond a single crash. First, let's talk about what actually happened. Bearman went into the barriers at Spoon Curve at Suzuka, and while the footage is striking, the context behind the incident is what's truly alarming to people across the paddock. This wasn't just a driver error or a mechanical failure in the traditional sense. This crash is being directly connected to the nature of the new 2026 power unit regulations, and specifically to how energy management is fundamentally changing the way cars behave on track. The 2026 regulations brought in a drastically new power unit architecture with a massive shift in the balance between combustion and electrical power. These new hybrid systems require drivers to constantly manage energy deployment and battery charging during a lap. The result is something nobody in the stands and very few watching on television would immediately understand just from looking at the cars going around. At certain points on the circuit, cars that are harvesting energy can be traveling at significantly slower speeds than cars that are in full deployment mode. We are talking about speed differentials that can be genuinely shocking, and this is the core of the safety concern that the Bearman incident has now forced into the open. Carlos Sainz said something that really stuck with people when he pointed out that the drivers had warned this could happen, and he expressed surprise that the conversation about potential changes seems to be focused mainly on qualifying rather than the broader racing picture. That quote matters, because it tells you that this wasn't a surprise to the drivers. They saw this coming. They raised the alarm before the season started. And yet here we are, watching it play out in real time. Leclerc has been critical about how qualifying specifically operates under the new rules. Verstappen has gone even further, voicing concerns about the direction of Formula One in general under these new regulations. When two of the biggest names in the sport are speaking this openly about their frustrations, you know the pressure on the FIA is real. So what did the FIA actually say? The governing body released an official statement before the race weekend break at Suzuka. And it's worth understanding carefully because they are clearly trying to manage expectations while also acknowledging the reality of this situation. The FIA confirmed that the 2026 regulations were always designed with some degree of flexibility built in. There are various parameters within the rules that can be adjusted, particularly around energy management. This isn't the FIA suddenly backtracking or admitting defeat. They are pointing to something that was supposedly part of the plan from the very beginning, which is that these rules were never meant to be completely locked down from race one. They also confirmed that a review was always going to happen after the initial phase of the championship. The idea was always to gather real-world data from actual race conditions, analyze it, and then assess whether changes are needed. And here is the concrete detail that matters most right now. Meetings are already scheduled for April specifically to discuss how the new regulations are performing and to decide whether adjustments are necessary. But the FIA was also careful to pump the brakes on the speculation. They made clear that any potential change, especially anything related to energy management, requires detailed simulations and careful analysis before anything gets signed off. They explicitly said that speculation about changes at this stage is premature. What they want people to understand is that there is a process. That process is already in motion, and that process takes time to do properly. They also reaffirmed something that should always be the foundation of every conversation about these regulations, which is safety. The FIA stated that safety remains a core element of everything they do, and the Bearman crash will absolutely be part of the data picture that feeds into those April meetings. Now let's zoom out and think about what all of this actually means for the championship going forward. We are in genuinely uncharted territory right now. These new power units represent probably the biggest technical shift the sport has seen in over a decade, and the on-track consequences are still being fully understood by everyone, including the teams, the drivers, the FIA, and the fans. The speed differentials created by different energy management strategies are going to remain a talking point every single race weekend until something changes. And the question is whether the FIA's process moves fast enough to address real safety concerns before something more serious happens. April meetings sound reassuring, but there are races happening between now and whenever any potential changes might realistically come into effect. Every race weekend between now and then carries risk. What's also fascinating about this situation is the political dimension. You have drivers, teams, manufacturers, and the commercial rights holder, all with slightly different interests at stake. The manufacturers spend enormous resources developing these new power units. Teams have built their cars around these regulations. Changing the rules isn't as simple as flipping a switch, because every significant adjustment to energy management parameters could shift the competitive order in ways that some teams benefit from and others don't. This is why the FIA's language about working collaboratively with all stakeholders is important. Whatever comes out of those April discussions will need to have broad buy-in to avoid a massive political battle. There's also the question of what kind of changes are even on the table. The FIA has talked about parameters that can be modified, but they haven't specified what those parameters are or what direction any adjustments might go. Are we talking about limiting the speed differential between cars in different energy states? Are we talking about changes to how and when energy can be harvested? Could qualifying formats change to reduce the extreme strategic variation we're currently seeing? All of these remain open questions, and the FIA has been deliberately vague about specifics. What we know for certain is that the Bearman crash at Spoon has accelerated this conversation in a way that no amount of paddock grumbling could have. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment on track to force the sport to move more urgently than it otherwise would. The FIA is trying to signal that everything is under control and that the process is working as intended. But the pressure from drivers of the caliber of Verstappen, Leclerc, and Sainz is not going away. The Japanese Grand Prix weekend has essentially served as a stress test for the new Formula One, and the results of that test are now being poured over by everyone involved. Those April meetings are going to be absolutely critical, and whatever comes out of them could shape the rest of the 2026 season in ways we can't fully predict yet. So here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The FIA is not ignoring the problems. They have a process in place and meetings already scheduled. But the sport is at a genuinely important crossroads right now, where the decisions made in the coming weeks could define whether these 2026 regulations become something the fans, drivers, and teams grow to love, or whether they become a cautionary tale about moving too fast with too big a change. Keep watching this story, because it is far from over. Drop your thoughts in the comments below about what you think the FIA should change and whether you think they will act fast enough. And if you want to stay on top of every development from the 2026 Formula One season, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an update. Ferrari just handed a 7-time world champion a car that he openly admitted felt slower in a straight line than the midfield. And that should terrify every single person who bought into their 2026 hype. Let us start by painting the picture of what actually happened in Japan. Going into the weekend, Hamilton and Ferrari had reasons to feel cautiously optimistic. The 2026 season is brand new, revolutionary regulations, completely redesigned cars, and Ferrari had shown flashes of genuine pace in Australia. But Suzuka has always been a circuit that exposes weaknesses brutally and completely. It is a track where car balance, aerodynamic efficiency, and raw straight-line speed all matter enormously, and they all need to work together in harmony. If even one of those elements is off, you are going to suffer. And Hamilton suffered. He started the race in what appeared to be a competitive position, sitting third on the road, which for any other driver in any other car would be a fantastic result. But what unfolded over the course of the Grand Prix was a slow, painful slide backward. Through the middle stint, everything seemed manageable, but then as the race entered its final phase, something went wrong. The gap on the straights became undeniable and unmistakable. Rival cars were pulling away from Hamilton not through corners, not through strategy, but simply by going faster in a straight line. He dropped from third to sixth, and in doing so raised massive questions about where Ferrari actually stands in the pecking order of this new generation of Formula One machinery. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because Hamilton's own words after the race are absolutely extraordinary when you think about who is saying them. This is a man who drove for Mercedes for over a decade and essentially turned them into the most dominant team the sport has ever seen. He knows what a fast car feels like. He knows what a competitive car feels like. And he sat in that Ferrari in Suzuka and told the world that it seemed like everyone around him had more power than him. Think about that for a second. Not slightly more. Not a marginal deficit. It felt like a significant gap in power delivery, and that is coming from his own subjective experience behind the wheel. The 2026 cars are unlike anything we have ever seen in Formula One. The new power unit regulations introduced this year have completely reshuffled the deck. There is a massive shift in the balance between the internal combustion engine and the electrical components, with the electrical deployment playing a far more significant role than it ever has before. Some teams have clearly nailed this transition better than others, and the consequences of getting it wrong are playing out in real time right before our eyes. On a circuit like Suzuka, which has long straights where the MGU-K deployment windows are critical, if your power unit is not delivering that electrical boost effectively, you are going to look like you have a completely different engine to the teams who got it right. This is actually what makes the 2026 season so dramatically compelling from a sporting perspective. The regulations reset has created genuine uncertainty. Mercedes demonstrated in Japan that they have found something special because their package looked incredibly strong. And when you compare that to what Hamilton was experiencing in the Ferrari, the contrast is almost poetic in a painful way for him personally. He left Mercedes after all those years of dominance to chase glory with Ferrari, and now his former team appears to be leading the charge in the new era while he sits sixth in Japan, wondering why everyone else has more power. But before we write Ferrari off completely, we need to apply some historical perspective here, because this sport has a way of humbling those who jump to conclusions too early. We are only in the opening weeks of a brand new regulatory cycle. Teams are learning their cars at a rate that is almost impossible for outsiders to comprehend. Engineers are finding performance in places they did not even know to look. And Ferrari specifically has a history of making significant leaps between the early races and the middle of the season as they unlock the true potential of their concept. Hamilton himself understands this better than anyone. He has been through regulation changes before. He watched Mercedes go from a car that was genuinely questionable in testing to an absolute rocket ship by the time the season was in full swing. He knows that a difficult race in March does not define a whole season, but that knowledge does not make standing on the Suzuka podium steps in sixth place any easier when you are Lewis Hamilton and you came to Ferrari to win championships. There is also a psychological dimension to this story that nobody is really talking about, and it deserves attention. Hamilton is now in his 40s, racing against a grid full of drivers who have grown up in the simulation era, who have developed their entire driving styles around modern Formula One. The 2026 regulations demand an extremely specific approach to managing that electrical power, deploying it at exactly the right moments, harvesting it correctly through braking zones, and balancing all of that with tire management and racecraft. It is an incredibly complex puzzle, and drivers who adapt to it fastest will have a massive advantage. Hamilton's pace in Suzuka suggests that either the car is not giving him the tools he needs, or the adaptation process is still ongoing, or quite possibly both. And that creates a fascinating subplot that will run through every single race weekend for the rest of this season. Can Hamilton find the rhythm with this new generation of machinery? Can Ferrari solve what appears to be a genuine power deficit compared to the top teams? These questions make every lap of every race more interesting. What we witnessed in Japan was not a catastrophe for Ferrari or for Hamilton, but it was a very serious warning signal. Sixth place in a race where you started third, losing positions in the closing laps because of straight-line speed, is not a points crisis yet, but it represents a performance gap that cannot be ignored or explained away. The data Ferrari have taken from Suzuka will be analyzed relentlessly between now and the next race. Every corner, every braking point, every single acceleration zone will be dissected to find where the time is being lost and why the power unit feels so different compared to what rivals appear to have. For fans of Formula One, this is genuinely one of the most exciting storylines we have had in years. Not exciting in a schadenfreude way, not because we want Hamilton to fail, but because watching the greatest driver of his generation fight against adversity with genuine fire still burning is just compelling television. He has not given up. He has not started managing expectations in that way where you can tell a driver has mentally checked out. He is frustrated, he is analyzing, and that combination in Lewis Hamilton historically produces something special. Suzuka asked Hamilton and Ferrari a very hard question. The answer they give over the next few races will tell us everything about where this season is actually heading. The Japanese Grand Prix was not the end of anything. It might just be the beginning of the most fascinating comeback story this sport has seen in a very long time. Make sure you are subscribed because we are going to be covering every single twist of this season as it unfolds. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Let's talk about what happened to George Russell at the Japanese Grand Prix. Because honestly, this weekend at Suzuka was one he is going to want to forget very quickly. If you have been following the 2026 Formula One season, you already know that things have been shaping up in a really interesting way. But the Japanese Grand Prix threw something unexpected into the mix, and it was not the result that George Russell or his fans were hoping for. So let's break down exactly what went wrong, why it matters for the rest of the season, and what this whole situation tells us about where Mercedes stands right now as a team. Before we get into all of that, make sure you subscribe if you have not already, because we cover Formula One like nobody else does. Breaking down the moments that actually matter and telling you what the mainstream coverage misses. Hit that notification bell too so you never miss an upload. Okay, so Suzuka, one of the greatest circuits on the planet. A track that genuinely separates the great drivers from the very good ones. It demands commitment through those high-speed sequences in the first sector. It demands bravery and precision through the chicane. And it absolutely punishes any weakness in car setup or driver confidence. It is the kind of place where you find out the truth about a driver and their machine very quickly. And the truth that came out at Suzuka this time around was pretty uncomfortable for George Russell. Let's start with qualifying, because that is where the problems really began to surface. Russell was beaten by his own teammate, the young Italian driver Kimi Antonelli, by a gap that was genuinely difficult to explain away. We are not talking about a tiny margin here. We are talking about a noticeable step between the two Mercedes drivers, and it was Russell who was on the wrong end of it. Now, losing to a fast teammate in qualifying happens to every driver occasionally. That is not the story by itself. The story is what it starts to reveal when you look at it in context. Kimi Antonelli has been one of the most exciting storylines of this entire season. This kid came into Formula One with enormous expectations on his shoulders, replacing Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes and carrying the hopes of Italian motorsport with him. That is not a small amount of pressure. And yet, race by race, he has been responding to that pressure in the best possible way. At Suzuka, he did not just perform well, he dominated from the Mercedes side of the garage. And that tells us something really important about the dynamic that is developing inside that team. Russell, on the other hand, arrived in Japan as the more experienced driver, the team leader in terms of tenure, the one who is supposed to be guiding the team's development and showing the youngster how it is done. And instead, he found himself being shown up on the track he was supposed to be leading on. The race itself was not a disaster in terms of incidents, but it was not clean either. Russell made some errors. He also had some unfortunate moments that were not entirely within his control. And to his credit, after the checkered flag. He was honest about that balance. He acknowledged that the problems this weekend came from his side of the garage. No, he did not deflect blame onto the car. He did not point fingers at strategy calls. He stood there and said the difficulties were coming from him. That kind of honesty is actually pretty rare in Formula One, and you have to respect it even when the admission itself is painful. But here is where the conversation gets really interesting. Is this a one-race blip, or is this part of a pattern? Because if you look at what Mercedes has been doing in 2026, they have clearly built a seriously competitive car. The pace is there, the team is functioning well. But the driver results are starting to tell a two-speed story, and one of those speeds belongs to Antonelli, who appears to be getting faster and more confident with every single event. Russell is not a bad driver. Let's be absolutely clear about that. He has incredible racecraft. He is one of the smartest technical drivers on the grid, and on his best days he can still produce performances that remind you why Mercedes fought so hard to sign him. But Formula One in 2026 is ruthless. The regulations have shaken things up. The competition is tight, and you cannot afford weekends where you are consistently one step behind your own teammate. Not when that teammate is a rookie who is supposed to be learning from you. The psychological dimension of this is really worth thinking about. When you spend an entire weekend feeling like you are chasing a car that should be equal to yours, but just is not responding the same way in your hands, that eats at you. It creates doubt. And doubt in a Formula One cockpit is one of the most dangerous things that can exist. Because confidence is such a massive part of what makes these cars go fast. If Russell is questioning himself going into the next set of races, that is a problem that goes beyond setup sheets and aerodynamic data. Now, here is something important to keep in mind. After Suzuka, Formula One is heading into a break, a pause in the calendar. And Russell himself acknowledged that this stoppage is going to be valuable, not just physically, but mentally. He needs to reset. He needs to go back to basics with his engineers, work through what is not clicking, and come back for the next chapter of the season with renewed clarity and renewed aggression. The break actually comes at a really interesting time, because it gives Mercedes the opportunity to do a deep analysis without the pressure of another race weekend immediately following. They can sit down, compare the data between both cars in forensic detail, identify exactly where the performance gap between their two drivers is coming from, and build a plan to address it. The question is whether Russell comes back from that break as the driver who drives like a champion, or whether the doubts continue to compound. And then there is the championship picture to consider. Mercedes is dominating as a constructor right now, which is an incredible position to be in so early in a season. Ferrari is clearly working on countermeasures and trying to close the gap, so the pressure is on Mercedes to maintain and maximize their advantage. That means they cannot afford to have one of their drivers performing below their own ceiling. Every point lost is a point that could come back to haunt the team when Ferrari and the others inevitably start to close in. The Japan story is also a reminder of just how fascinating the Antonelli versus Russell dynamic has become. We came into this season wondering how the young Italian would handle the step up to the front of the grid. Nobody was seriously asking whether Russell would be able to keep up with him. But that narrative is shifting, and it is shifting quickly. If Antonelli keeps delivering at this level, the conversations about him being a future world champion are going to start getting louder and louder. And for Russell, the urgency to respond becomes more critical with every round that passes. So what happens next? The break gives both drivers time to breathe and recalibrate. Russell needs to come back firing on all cylinders and remind everyone what he is capable of. Antonelli needs to avoid the complacency trap that sometimes catches young drivers when things are going well. And Mercedes as a team needs to keep squeezing every last drop of performance out of what is clearly a very fast package. Suzuka was a reality check. Not a catastrophe, not a season-ending moment, but a genuine warning shot that things inside the silver garage are not as straightforward as the constructor standings might suggest. The sport is about to get even more intense once the racing resumes, and George Russell knows better than anyone that the time to answer the questions being asked about him is coming very soon. Do not go anywhere because our next video is going to go even deeper into what Mercedes needs to do strategically to hold off Ferrari's challenge as the season builds toward the second half. You are not going to want to miss that one. Something happened at Suzuka last weekend that Formula One's official broadcast tried to move past as quickly as possible. Max Verstappen, the most dominant driver of his generation, got beaten by an Alpine. Before we get into the details, I want you to think about something. When was the last time you heard Max Verstappen sound genuinely defeated? Not frustrated after a bad pit stop, not annoyed at a safety car, actually defeated. Because that is what we are hearing right now, and it should concern every single person who watches this sport. So let us start at the beginning of 2026 and work through exactly how we arrived at this moment. The 2026 season was supposed to be a reset for everyone. Brand new regulations, new engine formulas, a technical overhaul that was meant to shake up the grid and create more competition. And Red Bull had spent years at the top, and the hope was that this regulation change would level the playing field. Well, the field got leveled all right, just not in the way most fans wanted. Red Bull did not step forward with the rest of the pack. Red Bull got swallowed by it. Through the first 3 Grands Prix of this season, we have watched Red Bull sink into the midfield. Not slightly off the pace, genuinely midfield, battling teams that, in recent years, they would have lapped multiple times over. In Japan at Suzuka, one of the most iconic circuits on the calendar, Verstappen crossed the finish line behind Pierre Gasly in an Alpine. An Alpine. When that result flashes on the timing screen, you know something has gone fundamentally wrong. And Verstappen himself has been brutally honest about the situation, which honestly makes it even harder to watch. He stood in front of the press after Suzuka and told them straight up that finishing 8th is something he can accept when the car simply does not have more to give. He said, and I want to make sure I get this right because it is a quote that deserves attention, that fighting in these conditions is not enjoyable. He said directly that right now he is not having fun doing what he does. That is a devastating statement from a driver of his caliber. This is not a driver throwing a tantrum or deflecting blame. This is a driver who genuinely does not know where the joy went. And when a competitor of Verstappen's mental fortitude starts talking about joy and the lack of it, you have to pay close attention because drivers like him do not use words carelessly. Now here is where things get really interesting and honestly a bit alarming for Formula One as a business and as a sport. Reports coming out of the Netherlands are suggesting that Verstappen could actually use the upcoming break in the calendar to seriously evaluate his future. We are not talking about vague retirement speculation from anonymous sources trying to generate clicks. The conversations happening around his camp apparently include genuine consideration of stepping away from Formula One entirely. And here is the thing that people keep forgetting when this topic comes up. Verstappen has always been open about the fact that his life does not revolve entirely around Formula One. He has said in various contexts over the years that he has other interests, other projects, other ambitions beyond the racing world. He is not someone whose entire identity is wrapped up in being a Formula One driver. That makes the retirement threat far more credible than it would be coming from almost anyone else on the grid. When someone tells you they have other options and other things that excite them, and then they start telling you they are not having fun at work, the math is not complicated. Think about what Verstappen walked away from mentally, even when he was winning. During the controversy of 2021 and the political pressures of 2023, there were moments where he expressed frustration with everything surrounding the sport beyond the actual driving. He has always been someone who values the purity of competition above the noise that surrounds it. Remove the competitive element. Put him in a situation where he is grinding around in 8th place with no realistic path to fighting for victories, and you have essentially taken away the one thing that keeps him in the car. Now let us talk about Red Bull for a moment, because they are caught in an absolutely terrible position here. Their entire brand, their entire marketing operation, their entire identity in Formula One since 2010 has been built on winning. And specifically for the past 4 years, it has been built on Verstappen winning. He is not just their driver, he is their product. He is the face on every billboard, every social media campaign, every energy drink tie-in. If Verstappen walks, Red Bull does not just lose a driver, they lose their entire narrative, and finding a replacement for a driver of his quality is not something you can do in an off-season. There is no one sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting to be unpacked and immediately perform at Verstappen's level. The driver market around someone of his caliber simply does not have an obvious successor ready to step in and paper over the performance gap that currently exists at Red Bull. The other dimension of this story that I think is being underplayed is what it means for the 2026 regulations themselves. There has already been significant discussion about whether the new technical rules have produced the right kind of racing. Some have argued it has become too chaotic, too unpredictable in ways that do not reward genuine car development. If the season continues with genuine championship contenders being mired in the midfield through no fault of their own driving, that is a serious problem for Formula One's credibility. The sport wants to tell a story of excellence, of the best drivers and the best engineers competing at the absolute limit. When the best driver on the planet cannot crack the top 6 because his car is fundamentally broken relative to the new regulations, that story falls apart quickly. Now, where does this go from here? The break that Verstappen has mentioned gives Red Bull a narrow window to either show him a credible development path or risk losing him. He needs to believe that the car can be fixed, and he needs to believe it relatively soon. Mid-season promises and vague assurances about updates are not going to be enough for someone who clearly operates on logic and results, rather than optimism and spin. If Red Bull can demonstrate in the coming races that they understand the problems and have a genuine upgrade trajectory that could bring them back toward the front, Verstappen might stay and fight. He has shown in the past that he is willing to endure difficult periods when he can see light at the end of the tunnel. But if the results continue the way they have been, if we are still watching him fight for 8th and 9th in the summer months, the retirement conversation is going to get louder and more specific. And at that point, Formula One will have a genuine crisis on its hands. Not a PR problem, not a narrative issue, but a structural crisis where its biggest star has decided the sport is no longer worth his time. What happens next in this story is genuinely one of the most important developments in Formula One in years. The sport has a lot riding on how Red Bull responds and how Verstappen decides to weigh his options during that upcoming break. Stay with us because this situation is moving fast, and we will keep you updated on every development as it comes. What if I told you that being disappointed after finishing second in a Formula One race is actually a sign of something incredible happening? That's exactly where McLaren finds themselves right now, and honestly, it tells you everything you need to know about where this team is headed in 2026. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we break down Formula One in a way that actually makes sense, and today we are diving deep into what happened at Suzuka, what Oscar Piastri's performance really means for McLaren, and why the most interesting headline coming out of Japan has nothing to do with who won the race. It has everything to do with a team that finished second and walked away thinking they could have done better. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you are going to see the 2026 Formula One season in a completely different light. Let's set the scene. Suzuka, one of the greatest circuits on the entire Formula One calendar. A track that demands absolute precision, bravery through those legendary high-speed corners, and a car that truly has to be dialed in from the very first lap. It is not a place where you can fake it. Suzuka will expose every weakness in your machinery and every hesitation in your driver. So when results come in from Japan, you pay attention because they mean something real. Oscar Piastri crossed the line in second place, his first podium of the 2026 season, and importantly, this was his first proper full-length race of the year. That context matters enormously. When you are a driver building your rhythm into a new season with a new generation of car, getting a podium at Suzuka in your first full race weekend is not a small thing. That is a statement. That is a driver reminding everyone exactly why McLaren placed their faith in him. But here is where it gets genuinely fascinating. The gap to the race winner was around 15 seconds. In the old days of Formula One, 15 seconds behind the leader and you would be celebrating like you had just climbed Everest. Second place, podium, job done. Crack open the champagne. Yet inside the McLaren garage, the mood was one of quiet disappointment mixed with determination. Not panic, not despair, disappointment. And there is a massive, massive difference between those things. Think about what that tells you. When a team finishes second at one of the most demanding tracks in the world, and their internal reaction is that they expected more, that they believe they are capable of more, you are watching a team operating at the absolute frontier of their own ambitions. McLaren are not celebrating survival. They are not relieved to be on the podium. They are measuring themselves against the absolute highest standard and finding a gap they want to close. That kind of mentality is what separates good teams from championship-winning teams. Now let us talk about the other side of this equation, because Piastri himself made a comment that really caught my attention. He said that being disappointed today is actually a positive thing. Let that sink in for a second. Being disappointed is positive. On the surface, that sounds like the kind of thing a politician would say, a way of spinning a result that was not quite good enough. But dig a little deeper and you realize he is being completely honest and analytically sharp at the same time. The reason disappointment is positive in this context is because it means the benchmark has risen. It means McLaren genuinely believed they could compete for victory at Suzuka. If they had gone into that weekend just hoping for points, hoping to stay out of trouble, hoping to survive a difficult race, then second place would feel like a gift. Instead, second place feels like a near miss. And near misses, when you are a racing team, are fuel. They are motivation. They are data points that tell you exactly where to push, where to develop, and where to find those precious tenths of a second that make all the difference. Here is something else Piastri pointed to. And this is arguably the most strategically important part of the whole story coming out of Suzuka. He identified Mercedes as a team that is attackable. Now, Mercedes in 2026 have clearly found something special. We saw it in how they dominated at certain points of this early season. They walked back into the conversation at the very front of this grid looking sharp, looking fast, and looking confident. For most teams, Mercedes right now is the mountain you stare up at and wonder how you ever climb. But Piastri is not staring up at that mountain with fear. He is looking at it and seeing the route to the top. That is an entirely different psychological position. When a driver of his caliber, backed by a team as organized and resourceful as McLaren, says that the leading team is attackable, you take that seriously. These are not words designed for social media headlines. These are words born from data, from race analysis, from telemetry comparisons, and from the kind of deep engineering conversations that happen long after the cameras have switched off. Lando Norris, meanwhile, came home in 5th place, ahead of the Ferrari driven by Lewis Hamilton, which is itself a noteworthy data point. Norris in 5th is not where McLaren want their championship leader to be. And you know, Lando himself will be grinding through the details of that result, looking for answers, looking for the performance that he knows is sitting somewhere inside that car. The fact that he was ahead of Hamilton's Ferrari is interesting context for the midfield battle. But the McLaren story right now is much bigger than midfield. This is a team that has built genuine championship-winning infrastructure over the past few years. The culture inside Woking has shifted. The way they approach race weekends, the way they develop their cars, the way their drivers communicate with the engineering team. It all reflects an organization that has learned from the painful lessons of being a struggling giant and has come out the other side sharper and hungrier. Piastri is a massive part of that. He is young, he is analytically brilliant, he is ice cold under pressure, and he is only going to get better as 2026 progresses. So what does all of this mean for the championship picture as we move forward? It means this season is nowhere near settled. Mercedes may have the edge right now, they may look like the team to beat, but when McLaren, with Piastri and Norris, turns up at a circuit like Suzuka and scores a podium and a 5th, while internally believing they should have done better, the rest of the grid needs to pay close attention. That is a team that is closing. That is a team that is learning. And in Formula One, the teams that learn the fastest are always the most dangerous. The 2026 regulations were always going to create this kind of early season volatility. New rules, new power units, new aerodynamic philosophies. Everyone is on a development curve right now, and the teams that maximize their learning in these early races are the ones who will be fighting hardest when it truly matters. In the second half of the season when championship points are won and lost. McLaren's message from Suzuka is crystal clear. They are not satisfied, they are not comfortable. And they believe the car and the drivers they have can go toe-to-toe with Mercedes before this season is over. Oscar Piastri standing on that Suzuka podium was just the beginning. If you found this breakdown useful, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more F1 fans like you. Subscribe if you want to stay across every development as this 2026 season heats up, because trust me, it is going to be an absolute ride. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think McLaren can chase down Mercedes this season? I want to know what you think. I will see you in the next one. Verstappen's future could be decided by the upgrades coming in Miami. McLaren sends a warning to Mercedes, and Ollie's crash changes everything for F1's regs. Let's get into the latest F1 news. What if the most dramatic Formula One weekend of 2026 just happened, and almost nobody is talking about what it actually means for the future of the sport? Because right now, after everything that went down at Suzuka, Formula One is standing at a genuine crossroads, and the consequences could reshape everything we thought we knew about this season. Stay with me, because today we are breaking down the Japanese Grand Prix from every angle. The historic milestone, the retirement bombshell, a terrifying crash, and an Italian support crisis that nobody saw coming. Let us start with a headline that should have every single Formula One fan paying close attention. Kimi Antonelli is now the youngest driver in the history of Formula One to lead the Drivers' Championship. Let that sink in for a second. The youngest ever. Not just in recent memory, why not just in the modern era, but in the entire history of this sport. A kid from Bologna, Italy, is sitting at the top of the standings after round 3 of the 2026 season, and the way it happened makes this story even more compelling than the result itself. Antonelli started from pole position, which already tells you how fast this guy is. But then the race start went wrong. He had a poor getaway, and before long he found himself buried down in 6th place. For most drivers, especially young ones still finding their feet at the very top of the sport, that would be a story about damage limitation. But not for Antonelli. He kept his pace, he kept his head, and then the safety car came out at exactly the right moment, cycling him back toward the front of the field. He ended up taking the victory, and with it, why, that historic championship lead. Now I know some people will say the safety car handed him that win, and look, luck is always part of racing. But here is what you cannot luck your way into. Pole position, the pace to hold yourself in contention after a race start disaster, and the mental composure to execute a clean race, while the whole paddock watches your every move. Spanish publication Marca had it right when they described Antonelli as having charisma and leadership qualities that go well beyond his age. This is not just a fast driver getting fortunate results. This looks like the real deal. But here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, and this is one of those layers to this story that mainstream coverage keeps glossing over. Italy now has a dilemma on its hands. La Gazzetta dello Sport, one of the most respected sports publications in Italy, has highlighted that Italian fans are essentially being pulled in 3 different directions simultaneously. On one side, you have Ferrari, the eternal heartbeat of Italian motorsport passion, the team that represents national pride on a level that transcends sport. On the other side, you now have an Italian driver, born in Bologna, racing for Mercedes, potentially the championship frontrunner this year. And Ferrari, based on early season performance, looks like it could be the primary challenger to stop Antonelli from winning the title. So what does an Italian fan do? Do you back the Italian driver or the Italian team? Do you cheer for Antonelli's success, knowing it might come at the cost of Ferrari standing on the top step? Or do you stay loyal to Ferrari and hope they can beat their own countryman to the championship? La Gazzetta dello Sport has framed it as a 3-way split among fans. Ferrari first, Italy first, or some complicated hybrid of both until the moment arrives where a genuine choice must be made. That tension alone makes the rest of this season appointment viewing. Now let us shift to something that carries far more serious implications than championship standings. Oliver Bearman's crash at Suzuka was not just a frightening moment. According to The Guardian, it represents what they are calling a genuine safety crisis in Formula One. And the concern is one that multiple drivers had actually been voicing before this crash even happened. Here is what occurred. A Bearman was following Franco Colapinto's Alpine through the middle sector of the circuit when the closing speeds caught him completely off guard. The new power units introduced under the 2026 regulations have fundamentally changed how these cars perform, and the speed differential between cars in certain scenarios has created situations that the current regulations were not fully designed to handle. Bearman was forced onto the grass and into the barrier at high speed. The crash was enormous. What makes this particularly concerning is that this was not an isolated freak occurrence. Drivers had been warning that something like this was likely to happen given the characteristics of the new machinery. This is exactly the kind of situation that demands urgent attention, and to their credit, there does appear to be genuine will across Formula One and the FIA to address it. The Guardian noted that the sport has sharp minds focused on finding solutions, which is encouraging, but the fact that it took a major accident to accelerate the conversation is the kind of detail that should make everyone a little uncomfortable. The 5-week break before the next race gives the sport a window to act. The question is whether they will use it decisively enough. And now we come to the story that might define the entire narrative arc of the 2026 season. Max Verstappen, 4-time world champion, one of the greatest drivers this sport has ever seen, is reportedly seriously considering retiring from Formula One at the end of this year. Dutch publication De Telegraaf has reported this. Now, and given how vocal Verstappen has been about his dissatisfaction with the new regulations, it is not difficult to believe. Red Bull and Verstappen are not competing at the front of the field right now. The new 2026 regulations have reshuffled the competitive order in a way that has hit the team hard. But what is really eating away at Verstappen is not just the results. It is how the cars are required to be driven. He has made it abundantly clear that he does not enjoy the challenge these new cars present. The driving style they demand, the way they behave, the philosophy behind them, none of it aligns with what Verstappen loves about racing. And this is someone who has never been a driver who chases money or headlines. He races because he genuinely loves competition. When that love is compromised, when the thing you have dedicated your entire life to no longer gives you what it once did, what is the point? That is the question Verstappen appears to be wrestling with. He is not just having a frustrating season. He is questioning whether the sport he fell in love with still exists in its current form. Now pivot to the story coming out of Australia, because Oscar Piastri's race at Suzuka deserves serious attention. After non-starts in both Australia and China to open the season, consecutive mechanical disasters that wiped out any early championship momentum, Piastri finally got a clean race in Japan. And he did not just survive it, he finished second and was voted Driver of the Day by fans. Remember, this is someone who came agonizingly close to winning the championship in 2025, only to see it taken by his McLaren teammate, Lando Norris. He carries that into 2026 with a point to prove. And in Suzuka, we saw exactly the kind of performance that reminds everyone why he belongs in this conversation. The gap to Mercedes is significant right now, but Piastri's title aspirations are alive, and if the championship tightens up over the coming races, that Driver of the Day performance in Japan might look like the moment his 2026 season genuinely began. So here is where everything stands. Formula One in 2026 is electric and unsettling at the same time. A teenage champion contender is making history. A safety crisis demands immediate answers. The greatest driver of his generation might be about to walk away. An entire nation is being asked to choose between its heart and its history. And a determined Australian is quietly rebuilding his title campaign in the background. The 5-week break before the next race is not just a pause in the calendar. It is a pressure cooker. Every one of these storylines is going to simmer, and when the racing returns, something is going to give. If you want to stay across every development between now and the next Grand Prix, make sure you are subscribed, because this is the season that changes Formula One forever. Hit that notification bell, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and we will see you very soon. Let me get one thing straight before we dive in. The 2026 Formula One season has already started delivering drama, surprises, and storylines that nobody fully predicted. And right now, one of the biggest talking points is where exactly Lando Norris fits into this championship picture. Because based on what we saw in Japan, the defending world champion is not yet where he needs to be, and he knows it. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, we break down Formula One in a way that actually makes sense. No fluff, no filler, just the real story behind the results. Today we are talking about Lando Norris, the Japanese Grand Prix, and what he revealed about his struggle to feel comfortable in his car right now. But more importantly, we are going to look at what he is expecting from the Miami Grand Prix and why that race could be a genuine turning point in his 2026 season. Let us start with Japan. Suzuka is one of those circuits that punishes any weakness in your car setup and any weakness in your confidence as a driver. It is a track that demands trust, commitment, and a real connection between a driver and their machine. You cannot fake it at Suzuka. You cannot muscle your way through the high-speed sections if something feels off. And for Norris, something has clearly been feeling off. He came away from the Japanese Grand Prix with 5th place, which on paper looks like a solid enough result. He actually finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari, which gives him some bragging rights. And he climbed to 5th in the Drivers' Championship standings. Which means the damage to his title defense has been limited, at least for now. But anyone watching closely knows that 5th place at Suzuka masked a weekend that was genuinely difficult for the McLaren camp. The problems started on Friday. Technical issues with his car compromised his practice sessions, which meant he was already playing catch-up before the competitive part of the weekend even began. When you lose that Friday running, you lose your chance to dial in the setup, understand the tire behavior, and build the kind of confidence that you need to attack a circuit like Suzuka. Norris had to do all of that work in compressed time, and the result was a weekend where he never truly felt at one with the car. This is what makes his post-race comments so interesting. Norris did not hide from the situation. He was direct about the fact that he is not yet comfortable with the car, and that admission from a world champion is significant. This is not a rookie trying to find his feet. This is a driver who won the championship last year, who knows what a fast McLaren feels like, and who is honest enough to say publicly that right now, that feeling is not there. Now here is where the story gets genuinely compelling, because Norris did not just talk about the problem, he talked about the solution. According to the reigning champion, Miami is going to bring updates. The team is planning to take a meaningful step forward in terms of performance at that race. And in the current Formula One landscape, where development speed can completely reshape the competitive order, this matters enormously. Miami could represent the moment where we start to see the real McLaren of 2026, rather than the slightly compromised version we have been watching so far. Think about what this means for the championship battle. The 2026 season has introduced new regulations that have shuffled the grid in ways nobody fully anticipated. We have already seen Mercedes looking incredibly strong, we have seen Ferrari responding aggressively, and we have seen the narrative forming around whether McLaren can defend the titles they fought so hard to win. Every race right now is not just about points, it is about understanding who actually has the best car and who is going to have the best car in 6 months' time when the championship really gets decided. A Norris finishing 5th in Japan, while not fully comfortable in his car, is actually one of those facts that cuts both ways. On one hand, he is losing ground to whoever is leading the championship. On the other hand, if a driver finishes 5th while openly admitting they are not yet at home in the car, what does that mean for when they are fully comfortable? What does that mean when the updates arrive and the car starts behaving the way he expects it to? The answer could be very interesting for anyone who has written McLaren off after these opening rounds. There is also a psychological dimension here that is worth exploring. Lando Norris became world champion last year, and with that title comes a different kind of pressure. You are no longer the challenger, you are the hunted. Every driver on the grid wants to take what you have, and every difficult weekend gets scrutinized far more intensely than it would have before. The narrative around a champion who is struggling lands very differently than the narrative around a challenger who is finding their way. Norris seems to understand this. His willingness to be open about his discomfort, rather than deflecting or making excuses, shows a maturity that is actually one of his greatest assets. He is not pretending everything is fine. He is not pointing fingers at the team or at circumstances. He is identifying the issue, acknowledging it publicly, and focusing forward on Miami as the next opportunity to reset. That kind of clarity under pressure is what champions are made of. And let us not forget the context of the broader season. We are still in the very early stages of 2026. The races in Australia and Japan have given us an opening chapter, but this story has a long way to run. Points gaps that look significant in April look very different in September. Teams that bring strong updates in the middle of the season often end up defining the championship trajectory more than whoever won the first few races. McLaren know this better than anyone. They have been through cycles of being ahead, falling behind, and coming back stronger. Their technical operation understands how to develop a car across a season, and if Norris is saying publicly that Miami brings a step forward, you can be fairly confident that the engineering team behind him has something real to offer. So, here is the overall picture heading into the Miami Grand Prix. Norris is 5th in the Drivers' Championship, coming off a weekend where he was compromised from Friday onwards, finishing in a position that kept him in the hunt without really threatening the front. He is not fully comfortable in his car. He knows it, his team knows it, and now we all know it. But the updates are coming, and the reigning world champion is pointing toward Miami as the race where the trajectory starts to change. That is a story worth watching very closely. If you are a Formula One fan who has been wondering whether McLaren and Norris are genuine contenders in 2026, or whether last year was their peak, the next few weeks are going to tell you a lot. Miami is a circuit with its own unique characteristics, street sections combined with a more permanent layout, high temperatures, a demanding race for tires and strategy. It is the kind of venue where car performance and driver confidence both matter enormously. If the updates deliver what Norris is suggesting, we could be about to see a completely different McLaren from the one we watched struggle at Suzuka. And if the updates do not deliver, then the questions around their title defense are going to get much louder very quickly. That is the thing about Formula One in 2026. Every race feels like a verdict. Every update package feels like a statement. And every driver comment after a difficult weekend either builds belief or raises doubt. Norris chose to build belief. Miami is where we find out if that belief is justified. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you do not miss our full Miami Grand Prix coverage. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think McLaren can get back to the front with these updates, or have other teams already moved too far ahead? Let us know where you stand. See you in Miami. The FIA signed off on rules in January that drivers warned would create exactly what we saw at Suzuka on Sunday, and then pretended to be surprised when it happened. Let's set the scene properly, because if you only caught the highlights, you might not fully understand just how terrifying this moment actually was. Suzuka is already one of the most demanding circuits on the Formula One calendar. It is fast, technical, and completely unforgiving. The approach to Spoon Curve, where this incident happened, is one of the highest speed sections of the entire track. Drivers are carrying enormous velocity heading into that corner, and there is basically zero margin for error. Now throw a significant speed differential between two cars into that equation, and you have a recipe for disaster. Oliver Bearman, driving for Haas, came upon Franco Colapinto in what appeared to be a situation entirely created by the new 2026 energy management rules. And this is the part that makes this story so much bigger than just a racing incident between two drivers. The new 2026 machinery has cars operating in very different modes simultaneously. Some cars are deploying stored electrical energy and effectively getting a boost of power. At the exact same time, other cars are in harvesting mode, which means they are essentially collecting energy and running considerably slower than usual. The speed gap between a car in deployment and a car in harvesting mode can be genuinely enormous. We are talking about dramatic closing speeds that drivers simply do not have enough time to react to safely, especially at a circuit like Suzuka where everything happens so fast. A Bearman tried to go around the slower-moving Colapinto. He ran onto the grass and completely lost control at around 190 miles per hour. The impact with the barrier registered at 50 G. For context, that is an absolutely brutal force on a human body. The fact that Bearman walked away, albeit with a limp and bruising to his right knee rather than broken bones, is genuinely remarkable. This could have been so much worse. The Haas team confirmed that Bearman avoided any fractures, which, given what we saw on screen, is almost hard to believe. But make no mistake, this crash was serious, and the entire paddock knew it. Now here is where things get really interesting from a regulatory and political standpoint. The FIA came out after the race and confirmed that this incident is directly linked to the energy deployment and harvesting dynamics of the new 2026 rules. This was not driver error. This was not a mistake by Bearman or Colapinto. Haas team principal Ayao Komatsu made that absolutely clear, placing no blame on either driver whatsoever. The governing body has now confirmed that a number of meetings are being scheduled for next month, specifically to look at refining the 2026 regulations to address this exact hazard. And prominent voices in the sport are weighing in with real urgency. Former world champion Damon Hill drew comparisons to what could be perceived as brake testing situations, not because drivers are intentionally slowing each other down, but because the speed differences created by these energy systems can look and feel very similar from the cockpit. Carlos Sainz had already been vocal about this kind of risk, and the Bearman crash at Suzuka essentially validated every concern that had been raised. This is not a fringe worry anymore. This is a documented safety hazard that has already produced a 50 G crash on one of the fastest circuits in the world. So what happens now with Franco Colapinto? This is where the story takes another dimension entirely. Despite the FIA's own statement confirming that the incident was a consequence of the new regulations and not Colapinto's fault, he has still faced significant online criticism and abuse in the aftermath of the Japanese Grand Prix. His management company, Bullet Sports Management, he stepped in quickly to address the situation publicly. They were clear in their messaging. Colapinto was unlucky with the timing of the safety car during the race itself, which cost him any realistic chance of fighting for points. On the incident with Bearman, they reiterated the official position that Franco was not at fault and that this was a direct consequence of how the 2026 energy management rules work. They also issued a direct appeal to Colapinto's fan base to not engage with the negativity and instead channel that energy into supporting their driver positively. What gives this situation even more weight is the context surrounding it. Just 2 weeks before Japan, there was the Chinese Grand Prix incident involving Colapinto and Esteban Ocon. That collision led to Ocon receiving death threats, a situation serious enough that FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem personally reached out to Ocon in response. The online abuse directed at Formula One drivers has become a recurring and genuinely concerning issue, and the sport's governing body has been actively trying to tackle it through its United Against Online Abuse campaign. Bullet Sports Management struck a careful balance in their communications following Suzuka. They acknowledged the incident, defended their driver clearly and factually, and then pivoted to a message of positivity for fans. Their advice was straightforward and honest. They said Colapinto is stronger than people might think, that negative comments will not affect him, and that fans should focus their energy on support rather than retaliation against critics. It is a measured and mature response to what has become an unfortunately common dynamic in modern Formula One's digital landscape. But stepping back from the social media noise and looking at the bigger picture, the story coming out of Suzuka really is about the regulations themselves. The so-called mushroom boost phenomenon, where cars get sudden surges of electrical power creating dramatic speed variations between nearby cars, was flagged as a potential danger before the 2026 season even properly got going. This crash was described by some as the feared consequences of that system being realized in the most dramatic way possible on a race weekend. The FIA has a responsibility here, and it appears they know it. Scheduling meetings to review and refine the regulations is the appropriate response. But the question now being asked across the paddock is whether changes will come quickly enough and whether they will be substantial enough to genuinely reduce this kind of risk. Because Suzuka was a very loud warning, the next one might not end with just bruising. What we witnessed in Japan was a collision of multiple forces, a genuinely dangerous regulatory framework producing exactly the hazardous speed differentials that critics warned about, two drivers caught in circumstances largely beyond their control, and an online culture that still too often directs its frustration at individual people rather than the systems that created the problem in the first place. Colapinto and Bearman both deserve better than that. The sport deserves better than that. If you have any thoughts on whether the FIA needs to move faster on these regulation changes, or whether you think the 2026 rules need a fundamental rethink on energy management, drop everything in the comments below. This is one of those moments in the season where what the governing body does next really matters. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss our continued coverage as this story develops, because based on everything we are hearing, this conversation is just getting started. Toto Wolf just told the entire world that the wrong Mercedes driver won in Japan. And somehow that's not the biggest story coming out of Suzuka. Alright, so let us set the scene. Suzuka, one of the most iconic circuits in all of motorsport. A track that demands absolute precision, machine and driver working in perfect harmony. And for much of the Japanese Grand Prix weekend, it looked like Mercedes was going to have a fantastic day on both sides of the garage. Kimi Antonelli took the win, his second consecutive victory. That is the headline that the team wanted to celebrate. But behind that victory, there is a story that the data tells very differently, and it is a story about what could have been for George Russell. Russell started from the front row. He was right there, mixing it with the leaders, pushing hard in the upper echelons of the race order. This was not a weekend where he was off the pace or out of the picture. Far from it. He was competitive, he was fighting, and by all accounts he was having the kind of race that looked like it could result in a podium or potentially even more. And then everything started to unravel. Here is where it gets really interesting. Toto Wolf came out after the race and gave one of those brutally honest assessments that you do not always get from team principals. He said that in equal machinery, Russell would have been ahead of Antonelli. Let that sink in for a second. The team boss of Mercedes publicly stating that his experienced British driver, with equivalent equipment, would have outperformed the young Italian sensation who just won the race. That is a significant admission. That is Wolf looking at his own team dynamics with clarity and saying, hey, we need to be straight about what actually happened here. So what exactly went wrong? Well, it was not just one thing. It never is in Formula One. It was a combination of factors that stacked up on top of each other in the worst possible sequence. First, there were strategic calls that did not go Russell's way. In modern Formula One, race strategy can make or break your entire afternoon regardless of how fast your car is on pure pace. One call made at the wrong moment, one undercut opportunity missed, one overcut that does not work out, and suddenly you are stuck in traffic or on the wrong tire at the wrong time. That appeared to be part of what happened to Russell in Japan. But then came the killer blow. During a critical phase of the race, right at the moment when Russell was trying to defend his position against Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, a problem emerged with the electrical system of the W17. Think about the timing of that. This is not a malfunction that happened during a quiet moment in the race. This hit George when he needed every single thing his car could give him. He was under attack from one of the quickest cars and one of the most aggressive overtakers in the sport, and his machinery started working against him rather than for him. Defending a position at Suzuka under those circumstances without a fully functioning car is essentially mission impossible. The result? Russell crossed the line in fourth place, behind his own teammate, behind Oscar Piastri, and behind the Leclerc Ferrari that he had been trying so hard to keep at bay. Fourth place in Formula One is genuinely what they call the worst position. You are the first person who does not stand on the podium. You have done an extraordinary amount of work, you have extracted enormous performance over an entire race weekend, and you get nothing to show for it in terms of the celebration, the trophy, the champagne. And when you know internally that without the electrical fault and the strategy issues you might have been fighting for the win, or at least a strong podium, that fourth place burns even harder. Now let us think about what this means in the bigger picture. Mercedes, heading into 2026, made a massive call by pairing the vastly experienced Russell with the young Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli is extraordinary talent. That is not up for debate. Here, 2 wins in consecutive races makes that point better than any argument I could construct. But Russell is no passenger in this team. He is a serious racing driver, a race winner himself, someone who has consistently demonstrated that when everything clicks, he is capable of beating anyone. Wolf's admission actually tells you something important about the internal dynamics at Mercedes right now. He is not dismissing Russell. He is acknowledging that the competitive picture is genuinely tight and that circumstances have been a factor in how the season has unfolded so far. This is where the tension in the Mercedes garage starts to build in a really fascinating way. You have got Antonelli with the momentum, with the wins, with the confidence that comes from performing at that level early in a season. And you have got Russell with what you might call a chip on his shoulder, the knowledge that but for some cruel twists of fate, the narrative of this season might look very different right now. That kind of dynamic is rocket fuel for internal competition. It pushes both drivers to extract more from themselves and from the car. From a pure championship perspective, the question now becomes whether Russell can convert his underlying pace into results consistently before the deficit becomes too large to overcome. Points are points regardless of how fast you were or what went wrong. The scoreboard does not care about electrical faults. It does not care about strategy calls that backfired. It simply records who crossed the line where. So Russell needs to find a way to turn the speed that Wolf is clearly acknowledging into actual championship points on a week-by-week basis. And what about the W17 itself? An electrical fault during a race is concerning for any team, but particularly for Mercedes, who are trying to establish themselves as the dominant force again after a difficult few seasons. These are the kinds of reliability gremlins that can derail championship campaigns if they are not diagnosed and resolved quickly. The engineering team will have been working through the night, analyzing exactly what happened, why it happened when it did, and making absolutely certain that it does not happen again at the next race. The Ferrari angle here is also worth noting. Leclerc managed to get past Russell and finish on the podium in Japan. Ferrari has been described in reports as accelerating their countermeasures in response to Mercedes' dominance. So the competitive picture across the top teams is shifting race by race. Mercedes cannot afford to hand positions away to their rivals through mechanical failures or strategic mistakes, especially when Ferrari appears to be closing the gap. What strikes me most about this entire situation is the honesty from Wolf. Team principals often speak in careful, diplomatic language designed to protect everyone involved. But what Wolf said after Japan was direct. It was an acknowledgement that Russell was on the wrong end of things that were not primarily his fault. That matters for team morale. It matters for how Russell approaches the next races. And it matters for how the outside world understands what is actually happening inside the Silver Arrows right now. George Russell came to Mercedes to compete at the absolute highest level. He has shown flashes of what he can do when everything lines up. The Japanese Grand Prix was a reminder that in Formula One, sometimes the sport itself seems to conspire against you. But drivers of Russell's caliber use those moments as fuel. The next circuit, the next race weekend, the next opportunity to show exactly what they are made of. The 2026 season is young. There are many races still to be run. Antonelli has the momentum and the wins right now, but the championship is far from decided. And with Wolf on record saying that Russell would have been ahead in equal conditions, you can be absolutely certain that the British driver is going to make sure he creates those equal conditions himself as the season progresses. That is the story to watch. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss a single development, because this season inside Mercedes alone is worth watching every single week. What if I told you that one of the most controversial figures in Formula One history might actually be making a comeback, and the man who despised him most just gave a surprisingly honest reaction? Yeah, we need to talk about Christian Horner, Toto Wolf, and everything going on behind the scenes in F1 right now, because this story is way more layered than the headlines are letting on. Stick with me here, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what is at stake, why this rivalry still matters even after Horner left Red Bull, and what Wolf's comments actually reveal about the politics of Formula One that nobody is really talking about. Let's set the scene first. Christian Horner was the team principal of Red Bull Racing for years. We are talking about one of the most dominant runs in the history of the sport. Now, multiple Constructors' Championships, multiple Drivers' Championships. He built that team into a machine that genuinely changed the landscape of Formula One. And then, midway through the 2025 season, he was gone. Ousted. Just like that. The man who had been at the center of everything, Red Bull, suddenly found himself on the outside looking in. Now, obviously, someone like Horner does not just walk away quietly. This is a guy who thrived on the political chess match that is Formula One team management. He loved the spotlight, loved the confrontation, loved the game. So naturally, rumors have been swirling about where he might land next and whether there is a path back to the grid for him. And here is where it gets really interesting. Toto Wolf, the Mercedes team principal and arguably Horner's greatest rival, was asked directly about the possibility of Horner returning to Formula One. And instead of just dismissing it or throwing shade, Wolf gave this genuinely nuanced answer that honestly surprised a lot of people. He said he is in two minds about it. Two minds. Think about that for a second. This is the man who went toe-to-toe with Horner during 2021, one of the most intense, emotionally charged championship battles the sport has ever seen, when Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were fighting for the title down to the very last lap in Abu Dhabi. That rivalry between the two team principals was as fierce as anything happening on track. And yet here is Wolf saying he is genuinely split on whether Horner should come back. Why? Because Wolf made a point that I think a lot of people in the F1 community actually agree with deep down. The sport needs personalities. It needs characters. It needs people who are willing to be controversial, to stir things up, to create drama. Formula One without that element is just fast cars going in circles. With it, it becomes this entire political drama that keeps fans hooked between races, during press conferences, in the off-season. Horner was absolutely that kind of personality. Wolf even used this brilliant analogy. He told Fred Vasseur, the Ferrari team principal, that Formula One needs the good, the bad, and the ugly. And with Horner gone, he said only the good and the ugly are left. The bad is missing. Now obviously that is a playful jab, but there is real truth buried in it. Wolf is acknowledging that even someone who drove him absolutely crazy, who he had massive conflicts with, who did things that Wolf said he still cannot comprehend to this day, even that person had a role to play in making Formula One what it is. That is a really mature take. And honestly, it tells you a lot about how Wolf thinks about the sport. He is not just thinking about his own team, he is thinking about the health of the entire ecosystem. But here is where Wolf draws the line very clearly. He was asked whether Horner could ever be an ally, someone who shares objectives with him, maybe even someone who could work alongside him in some capacity. And Wolf shut that down immediately. He said he does not think so. These two are never going to be on the same side of anything. The rivalry runs too deep. The history is too complicated. Too many things happened over the years that left scars on both sides. And yet, and this is the part that really stood out to me, Wolf gave Horner genuine credit for his legacy. He acknowledged that there are not many team principals in the history of Formula One who have achieved what Horner achieved. Think about it objectively. The guy guided Red Bull from a newcomer team to the most dominant force in the sport multiple times over. That is not something you can just dismiss, no matter how much personal friction existed between them. Wolf even made this philosophical point that really resonated with me. He said that even your worst enemy has a best friend, which means there must be some goodness in them. He is basically saying that his personal feelings toward Horner do not change the objective reality of who Horner is as a person and what he accomplished. That is a level of self-awareness that you do not always see from people who are in the middle of such intense rivalries. Now, what does all of this mean going forward? Well, Wolf was honest that he does not actually know if Horner is finding his way back to the grid, or in what capacity that might happen. There are a lot of potential seats for someone with Horner's experience. Team principal roles do not come up all that often, but when they do, a name like Horner's is impossible to ignore. whether it is an existing team with a vacancy or potentially some new team looking for leadership. The connections and the knowledge he brings would be invaluable. And here is the psychological angle that I find fascinating. Wolf said he is at ease with whatever happens. Whether Horner comes back or not, Wolf feels settled. That is actually a really significant thing to say publicly. It signals that Wolf has mentally closed the chapter on that particular rivalry, enough that it is not hanging over him anymore. He is not scared of Horner returning. He is not hoping Horner stays away. He is genuinely in a place where he can observe whatever happens next with some level of detachment. That does not mean the rivalry is dead, by the way. If Horner walked back into the paddock as a team principal tomorrow, you better believe the dynamic between him and Wolf would reignite immediately. Old rivalries in Formula One never fully disappear. They just go dormant. The moment the conditions are right, they come back stronger than ever. And that is actually what makes this story so compelling for F1 fans. Think about what we could be looking at in the near future. A potential Horner return to the grid, going up against Wolf again in a completely different competitive landscape. The teams have shifted, the drivers have moved around, the regulations have changed. But the personalities at the top? That dynamic between those two is timeless. It would be must-watch television all over again. The bigger picture here is about what Formula One actually is as a sport and as entertainment. The 2021 season proved that the drama off-track can be just as compelling as what happens on it. The battles between team principals, the political maneuvering, the press conference mind games, all of that stuff is what separates Formula One from every other motorsport series on the planet. And Horner was a master of all of it. So whether you liked him or not, whether you thought he was brilliant or infuriating, you probably have to admit that the sport has felt a little different without him in it. Wolf clearly feels that too, even if he would never say it in exactly those words. The question now is whether Horner finds his way back, and what form that return takes. The paddock is watching, the teams are watching, and honestly, so are millions of fans around the world who remember exactly what that era felt like, and would not mind seeing a little bit of that fire come back to the sport. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear. This story is far from over. Make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the updates as this situation develops. Because in Formula One, things can change faster than a pit stop. And when Horner is involved, it is never boring.